health and safety legislation is law, and now that's passed by the Parliament in either the state or the territory or the Commonwealth, and it includes acts, which are statutes, and their supporting regulations. Now, regulations are part of the legislation, and they prescribe how to comply with an act. And mandatory standards are referred to in acts also form part of the legislation, and they must be followed as well. Then you have non-mandatory standards and codes of practice, and they provide important guidelines even though they're not part of the law. So unlike codes that are approved by the Minister, regulations as part of the law must be approved by Parliament. They set out what must be done in relation to certain workplace health and safety matters. So they're not just simply advice, it's actual law. Altogether, they're almost 3 times the length of an act, so they're very specific, and your regulator's website will have those regulations online. So they cover a very wide range of detailed health and safety matters, and they need to be read together with the relevant parts of the Act. So, for example, to understand exactly what's required by law to deal with safe handling of substances, say for example asbestos, you'd also need to read the regulations covering those substances. They'll also refer to standards such as the Australian standards produced by Standards Australia and mandate them, which means by law you would have to use them, and so they mandate them for use in the workplace. And another source might be the national standards produced by Safe Work Australia. But wherever they come from, these mandatory standards form part of the regulations and they must be followed. And they have changed over time. They used to be prescriptive, but now it's, outcomes focused again. So it lets you to devise the best means of achieving them. So for example, it might be setting maximum noise levels, and they specify general processes and procedures to achieve safe outcomes. So such as a risk management method to control hazards associated with manual handling. So as you can see here in the pyramid, codes of practice are non-mandatory standards. That means that they're not mandated, that it's not legally required. But they do provide advice on how to apply the law in respect to the health and safety matters. Now, codes of practice can be used in a court of law to determine whether or not a duty has been complied with. So a court might use the code as evidence of what's known about a hazard and how to control it in a reasonably practicable way. So because of their role in court proceedings, even though they're not mandatory standards, codes of practice are sometimes referred to as evidentiary standards. And you can find the codes of practice on your regulator or Safe Work Australia's website. Now, as far as guidance material goes, that doesn't form part of the law, but regulators provide guidance notes, and this material covers basic instructions to workplace health and safety law, as well as specific information on hazards. There's even guidelines for brothels, so it gets quite extensive as it delves right down into industries there. But what's important to remember is that the law requires duty holders to consider all risks associated with work, not only those for which regulations and codes of practice exist. So you might find a hazardous situation in your workplace that isn't addressed from a specific regulation or standard or code of practice, in which case the guidance may be needed from a workplace health and safety professional, government workplace inspectors, or even an expert like an engineer or a doctor. So failure to seek and use such guidance may still contravene the law.